Welcome back to Exceptional Undergrads, a podcast where we interview successful students and explore how they achieve success at such a young age. Be sure to check out our show notes at exceptionalundergrads.com for all resources mentioned in today's episode. Today, I welcome Casey Goldstein to the show. Casey is a current senior at Duke University, studying computer science, environmental science, and entrepreneurship and innovation. He has a passion for sustainability and saving our planet. He's worked at a handful of climate tech startups. In addition, he's the founder of College to Climate, an online platform dedicated to helping college students find career opportunities in sustainability or the climate space. Casey brought us a wealth of knowledge on mental health and meditation, as well as a sneak peek into his TED Talk on goal setting. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Casey Goldstein. Casey Goldstein, welcome to the show, my friend. I'm excited to have you here.
Likewise, Jack. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Would you like to get us started here and tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you've accomplished so far?
Oh gosh, I'll do my best. So I'm Casey Goldstein. I'm from a town you've never heard of outside of Boston, Weston, Massachusetts. I'm a current senior at Duke University studying computer science, environmental science, and then innovation and entrepreneurship. Accomplishments wise, I guess it's probably best to start back in senior year of high school. My buddies and I, our senior spring, were able to create our own boutique frozen lemonade stand. We called it Quench, and we ran it in the Seaport District of Boston and had way too much fun doing that. So from an early start, I found a love for innovation and entrepreneurship. I can thank my parents for that. And as we transition into college, I've worked at a handful of startups, particularly in this climate tech space, which is any technology that benefits our planet in some capacity. And that's led me to co-found College to Climate, which is a platform that's helping college students find career opportunities in this climate tech space. And in addition to that, I've worked as an intern for a climate VC firm that invests in these climate tech startups. So I've been able to see both sides of the table.
That's awesome. I've looked into some of the stuff as well. I definitely want to start off here and hear a little bit more about this random boutique lemonade stand that you threw up, because I had a lemonade stand as a kid, but it seems like you were taking this to a whole new level. So what was the story behind that?
Well, hold on a second. I know nothing about your lemonade stand. For all we know, it was the same product offering.
That
We
is actually a very good call, except for my sister during that time sold the little mud balls as well by the lemonade stand. So, and I made 35 total dollars, and I think
you
she made
can't
more than
compete
me
with the
that
mud
day.
balls. It's just you
Exactly.
got to know the customer, especially for that demographic. We were able to lease a little plot of land, and when I say little, I mean 7 by 7 feet. If we go over, we get fined. And we built in my garage this wooden structure. We were just schlepping wood from Home Depot, and we built this shack. It's probably the most loving term that I could call it. And we created Quench. Quench was a boutique frozen lemonade stand. We sold all sorts of different flavors, whatever we can get our hands on, dragon fruit, peach, everything in between. We had so much fun doing it. It was just a couple of my best buddies at the time. We got a lot of traction. We got a lot of the crowd that was coming out of all of the offices that were in the building. We came to know some loyal customers that trusted for some reason these 18-year-olds to serve them drinks in the middle of the workday.
Wow. So dragon fruit flavored frozen lemonade. I can't say I've ever had that before, but it's definitely something that I want to try now. I'm very jealous of these
One of
businessmen.
one, one of one. We should have gotten the intellectual property.
Would have been a smart play, honestly. Would have been a smart play. All right, let's dive into a little bit more about College to Climate. You co-founded that. That's going along with a lot of the climate tech stuff that you're doing now, which you seem to be very into, being at a interning at a VC firm for that as well. And that seems to be one of the things that you're very into. Let me know about how you co-founded this and some of the other stuff around the climate space that you've been working on?
Definitely. So I caught the bug for all things sustainability and climate early on. I think in middle school, we had somebody come in and speak in front of my class and thoroughly freaked out the class about climate change to the point that I felt pretty obligated to find some way of contributing to the goal, fixing it. Cut to working at a couple of companies here and there. I had the privilege of studying abroad in Australia my junior fall. So this is a little bit more than a year ago. And while I was down there, I had way too much time on my hands to listen to podcasts and start poking around online for different communities. The great thing about the climate space is people are so nice. And that's pretty obvious to understand because these are folks that really want to solve these existential issues, right? So I was in Australia, and when I was down there, this whole industry of climate tech was just getting off the ground. It's extremely new in the US, but when I say it was new in Australia, I mean it was brand new. And folks were starting to have conferences and meetups, and people were so stoked that it was happening because it was first of its kind. I was able to sneak away from class and go to a handful of these conferences and fell in love with not only the solutions, but also the people that were creating these solutions. And the one gap that I found in this journey as I started joining all these communities out there is they're typically geared towards people that are in the mid stage of their careers that want to transition into climate. What I saw less of were people that were around my age, so college students or recent graduates that were interested in just getting their hands dirty now and not waiting to start. So I ended up meeting a handful of people in a community that already existed. They at the time were hosting virtual meetups solving this issue, which was how do we get college students in the same room chatting about these jobs and how do we go about finding these jobs? There was one kid from Elon University. There was one kid from Princeton University. After the call, I vigorously wrote a one-page paper on what I thought the vision of this could become. And we founded College to Climate that January.
So it took you going halfway across the world to get this amazing idea.
It's funny when people say halfway across the world because that is the other side of the world. What would be halfway across the world? Is halfway across the world like a quarter way?
Actually, wait a second. Oh, nope. Yeah, that would be across the world.
I was
Fully
always
across
confused.
the
Who
world.
knows? I need to take a look at a globe. Maybe Australia is a little bit closer than I gave it credit for. But yes, it took me thousands upon thousands of miles to have this epiphany to come back and do something that I was very, very able to do once I was back in the States.
I think the more inspiring thing than actually having the idea and going all the way, I guess, across the world, not halfway, would be the fact that you actually came back and took action on it. That's something that most people don't really do because the ideas nowadays are something that are very potent in society of coming up with random things that could be really good. But the thing that we're missing is a lot of the people who are willing to go out of their comfort zone and actually take action on these ideas. Is there anything that really came to your mind to where you could start taking action on the idea?
So the good news for me is I think more often than not, and this is especially true for aspiring entrepreneurs, people make the decision that they want to create a company and then they try to find what that company is. In this case, I was somebody who was trying to find these climate jobs. And I was so grateful that there were these two other people that were passionate about this enough to get the ball rolling to start having meetups. They had no intention of creating a company. I had no intention of creating a company when I met them. We were just so passionate about this issue and we saw white space to solve. So I think a lot of the times when you see people have these lofty ideas but no follow through is because they might not have started with the passion first. They might have fallen in love with the idea of creating a company and they were just trying to find whatever was going to be that company. So I think the biggest advice I have from people is first of all, stop focusing on what other people are doing. The right people started with the passion and created the company. And what you can do instead is just fall in love with the idea of exploring and flexing your curiosity because you will end up meeting people and meeting interesting problems in the world that you'll feel so motivated to solve in any capacity.
That reminds me of a good book by Simon Sinek. It's called Start with Why. It basically talks about how a lot of people he has this thing called the golden circles, I think is what it is. It's basically like three concentric circles that have how, it's like how, what, and why. Yeah, how, what, and why, something like that. But people end up starting with or it's what, how, why. That's why. And basically it's like why in the middle, how in the why in like the middle one, then the next row is how, and then it's what. And most people penetrate it from the outside and start with what, which I think is what you were explaining. And then why, if you start with why and you have that exact passion, then you're able to really convey what you're thinking about more and what you're actually trying to do more, and you'll be more successful because you have that backing of a purpose in a sense.
Bingo. 2 days ago, I'm part of this entrepreneurship accelerator program here at Duke. We had somebody come in and we had to watch Simon's TED Talk, which, by the way, for people that might not have the bandwidth and your very busy college schedules for a book, there's a 20-minute TED Talk that should hopefully get you started with the circles that you were talking about. But we were talking about folks like Steve Jobs. Whenever you met Steve Jobs, he never told you about the how or the what. He's not telling you about his products. He's telling you about how he wants to think different and completely change markets. And that was so compelling about him.
Yeah, I watched that TED Talk. I've read the book as well, and it was something that really clarified for me certain things for this podcast and whatnot as well. But on the topic of TED Talks, you let me know that you were about to give one of those, and I could tell by the way that you're speaking right now that you've been practicing because you're very articulate with the way that you're speaking. Would you like to let us in a little bit about this TED Talk that you have coming up soon?
Well, thank you for the nice words. We'll see how it goes next week. The TED Talk. So, Duke is a school that offers these TEDx programs. So, if you ever watch TED Talks, there's the TED Talks and there's TEDx High Point if you have one over there. And it's an amazing group of students that give other students, professors, faculty the opportunity to be on that stage and deliver a TED Talk. So believe me, the jitters are happening as we speak. After this call, I'll still need to work on the speech. What I'm hoping to talk about, so something that I haven't mentioned thus far is my struggle with depression and anxiety, which started sophomore year of high school around 2017. And that whole journey for me has looked very different every single year. The most notable thing I've done for it in the summer of 2022, I participated in a silent meditation retreat. It's called a Vipassana. And it's when you spend 100 hours over 10 days meditating in absolute silence. And they offer these programs all over the world. It's an incredible program. You only pay what you thought the experience was worth, and a fantastic network of people work around the world to create these programs for people. Needless to say, it was a life-changing experience in ways that I did not anticipate. The TED Talk will definitely be a tale of a non-conventional experience to a retreat. I didn't exactly walk out feeling holy and enlightened. In fact, it was definitely the most challenging experience I ever had. And the TED Talk dives into the expectations that I had going into the retreat, how that links to my depression and my expectations for trying to solve my mental health issues, which is a paradox in and of itself. It's the backwards law of happiness. The more you try to find it, the less you'll be able to. And then overall, shifting my mindset on how I can set goals or maybe not set goals when it comes to mental health or in other aspects to my life. That is the Spark Notes version. You will see a much rambly 12-minute version coming this Sunday.
I'm excited to check that out. I'll definitely link it below once it's out. I want to hear about how you got into this 10-day silent meditation retreat because I've been meditating now for like 2.5 or so years. It's helped me out tremendously with mental health and just focus in general. I hadn't even heard of this retreat before, but it sounds very exciting, very very hard potentially, and I want to hear if you can't, some of the experience, maybe you can give us some beforehand, but
Yeah,
at least how you got into it.
yeah. I'll keep an eye on the clock so I don't spend 3 hours explaining this. So I took a gap year between high school and college. This was before COVID, so I had the privilege to do some traveling. And the trip leader at the time, after hearing about my mental health struggles and my depression, approached me one day to ask if I'd ever heard of this Vipassana retreat. This was 2019. He went on to explain what it was. It was the 100 hours of meditation over 10 days. There's fasting involved, and for me, it hit two key aspects of my life. There was the goal seeking aspect of I want to challenge myself to accomplish great things, but there was also the I've been struggling with depression for the past 2 years. This seems like an off the beaten path remedy that could rival some of the other traditional treatments that I've been doing at the time. So I fell in love with the idea. I liked it as a challenge, but then also something that could bring me great value. It didn't happen until 2 years later because COVID had other plans. But like I said, they offer these programs all over the world. In fact, I'm from Boston. There's one 40 minutes from my house, and I decided to do it in Dubai because I happened to be working in Middle East that summer. So it was in a desert about 45 minutes outside of Dubai. When you get there, you give them everything you have on you, your computer, phone, things to read, write, or listen to. And then that night, you take an oath of silence. You're not supposed to speak for the 10 days. You meditate from 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. You've got breaks in between. You've got 2 meals a day, followed by 18 hours of fasting. And the meditation itself, I mean, it's probably not too dissimilar to what you've done with body scanning and awareness. I'm not going to try to make anybody think that I made things levitate while I was there. I mean, it was very simple practices, but doing that in the span that it was with nothing else to do in between is where the real impact comes from. And boy, was it difficult.
I haven't done 100 hours over the course of 10 days before, but I actually haven't spoke about this too much at all. I don't know if I have it all on the podcast, but middle of December this past year, I looked at my meditation app and saw that I just cracked 9,000 total minutes, and I said to myself, "Look, that's good, but I should get to 10,000 before the end of the year." And I decided, I was like, like that's not that big of a deal. You don't need to do it. Like, who cares? And then I decided, all right, no, I'm actually going to finish this. I'm doing it. So I did a challenge where I was supposed to do, it was like a little bit over an hour or so a day. And I usually around the time was doing like 20 minutes. And I decided to up it to like an hour, but I ended up not doing an hour a day and I scattered it apart. So I did a bunch of different like 2 hour sessions and things like that. And other ones were smaller. And I ended up finishing that the 24th of, I went from the 15th to the 24th. So I did about 1,000 minutes of meditation in, what was it, like nine days total, I think. So it was pretty crazy. And I since dropped the time of my meditation. Now it's like not as crazy anymore. But that was a very interesting experience for me to have, to just fit so much meditation time and silence and into a small period of time, that I feel like that, I mean, it's not as comparable, I would say, to yours, but I thought that was pretty challenging and I learned a lot from that.
Well, hold on a second. I mean, the actual time meditating is difficult enough, but let's talk about the fact that you ramped up immediately from 20 minutes to 1 to 2 hour sessions. That transition in and of itself is wildly difficult, and it's an incredible
I
accomplishment. Uh, you should be very proud of yourself.
Thank you. I'd sat for an hour, like hour sessions weren't really too bad. I just wouldn't do them all the time. I just practiced it like 20 minutes a day. And then I had sat for 2 hours like once or twice. But yeah, it was tough for just ramping it up. But I had some experience, so it wasn't too unbelievably crazy. But yeah, it is good to point that out, I guess. Thank you.
But I am curious on how that drop off felt. So you hit that 10,000 victory lap, and then did you immediately return to the 20 minutes of meditation? Because something that I will talk about a lot in the TED Talk is what that transition was for me, from 100 hours 10 days straight to what now. So how was that, how was that transition for you?
I had a period of time there where I kind of was questioning a lot of stuff of like, what should I do? Should I scale it back down? Should I go back to normal? Luckily, at the time, I was doing a challenge. This was also part of a challenge with one of my friends who, for some reason, decided to do this as well with me, which is kind of crazy. I ended up losing that challenge, which I don't really know if that's 100% facts there because she hadn't really meditated like at all. But, it was okay. I hit my 10,000 minutes and then had to continue to do more. So I was still elevated for the rest of the year. Not like crazy, but still elevated. And then from there, I realized I was like, I want to see what happens if I almost do the opposite and scale it down a whole bunch. So for the past month and a half or so, I've been doing 5 minutes a day, and I added in like small visualizations as well. It's been good. It gives me like, just like enough of a pause to where it works out well. But I think I'm eventually going to end up going back to more and still having that sort of in between session. It's been odd. Ever since I spiked it a bunch of time, I figured out a whole bunch of stuff. I actually just talked to somebody about this the other day. I figured out a whole bunch more about myself and like got a bunch of ideas. I was very in tune with like spirituality and like the universe and things like that. And like I got a whole bunch of ideas and it worked out really well for me. But it was like I wasn't doing enough actual work, it felt like. So I scaled it down.
I think that's such an important thing to highlight because that is the uncomfortable story. Because the assumption is once you go from 20 minutes to an hour, you realize, oh my gosh, an hour meditation, I feel so amazing. Let's keep going. Let's keep ramping it up. There's a limit. And more often than not, we see people go in these meditation sprints. It's what I did. And what I spend the most of the talk this next Sunday talking about is what was way more important for me was doing what you did, which was scaling back to 5 minutes. It's a really uncomfortable transition because you want to be able to tell people that you just are on the up and up. But what you're doing is you're taking the obligation out of it and you're peeling everything back until you just find the intrinsic value of meditating. Because I'm sure you weren't posting on social media about how you meditated for 5 minutes that day because you knew you were capable of doing 20 minutes or an hour. The only reason you were doing it is because you found value in the meditation. And it didn't matter if you're doing it for 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 20 minutes, you were doing it for the right reasons. So transitioning out of the Vipassana, what I did is I realized I was there, as much as I do not like to admit it, to challenge myself, to push me to my limits. But my expectation was that in so doing, on day 10, when I left, I would be a completely different person. My depression would be fixed, my mental health would be super strong, et cetera, et cetera. And that didn't happen because I was so fixated on day 10 that I did not care what day 2 or day 9 were like. And what's happened since then is the opposite, which is there's no more goals for me and my mental health. I'm going to set a daily intention and focus on the systems that I do on a daily basis to try to make sure I'm improving my mental health with no goal in mind. So if I sit down for 3 minutes of meditation a day, at no point in time can I get mad at myself for saying, why am I not feeling better? Why do I still have depression? The answer is it was just 3 minutes, right? And I start caring less and less about the goal, this monumental goal of solving all of my mental health issues, which, by the way, nobody has ever done before. And I'm just meditating because I appreciate what it does for me. And it gives me a platform to be able to experiment with other mental health regimens, going for walks, gratitude journal, etc. So this is me on my soapbox. Long story short, I am such a fan of people starting super, super, super infinitesimally small, especially if it's your first time with any of this. And then also only picking things that make sense for you, Jack, and you only, or for me, because there's only one person that understands at a fundamental level what would make you feel better, and it's you.
That's something I've been thinking a lot about lately, which is you can consume so much content and whatnot. And I hadn't been on social media I deleted social media for like a year from my middle of sophomore year to all the way back like a couple months ago, whenever I got it back to start running more about the podcast. and I loved it. Best time of my mental health, like literally ever. Fantastic times. And what I really noticed about a lot of this stuff whenever I got it back is I need to make sure that you focus on you, like myself. You can't just try and be, you can't take other people's stuff and like try and be this other person. You can look at their things and what they're saying and consider their information, but then figure out how it applies to you and then use that to increase yourself, becoming a better version of you. And it's something that I honestly I've struggled with a little bit now because I basically I almost let my guard down in a sense whenever I got social media back. And it's like weird for me to say that because I'm the person who would never be on his phone at all. But consuming more content now and speaking with other people, and like kind of goes both ways here because I speak with other people and I say things, then I also take in information, and I'm biased towards certain things as well. But taking in this other information now, it just makes me realize I have to have this open to everything, attached to nothing mentality of taking in all this different information, but then really realizing like what is it that is of value for me, and if it's not that, then just throw it to the side and just continue to focus on stuff that's going to develop myself and not form me into whoever the biggest influencer is at this time.
That was so well said. Open to anything, attached to nothing. I might have to find a way to incorporate that. But the joke I like to make is, I mean, for anybody out there that's watched TED Talks before or motivational videos, and then you close the computer and you don't make sweeping changes to your life, and you're like, wait, hold on a second. I was so inspired by what that guy had to say. Why am I not taking what he said under consideration? First of all, you have to start small. And a lot of people like to talk about lofty dreams and the amazing things that they've done. And the second part is they're talking about things that worked for them. And you're absolutely right. There are probably elements of what they said that might work for you, but it's not one size fits all. So I like the idea of taking away all of the other ideas that they gave you, find some that might work for you and just try it. And if it doesn't work, fantastic. You now know that that might not be an effective strategy for you. That's almost as powerful as knowing what does work for you. And I think it's such a problem because you're right. When you're on social media all the time, you have people telling you what worked for them, or maybe even not. Maybe they're just on social media to be on social media. That's a whole other can of worms. Point being, it's way more important to just shop around and have such a curiosity mindset when it comes to like, ooh, that sounds kind of cool. I'm going to add that to my little toolbox. I'm going to try it one day and maybe it won't work, but maybe it will.
That's why I feel like experimenting with things is so useful, just to take in this other information and then try stuff. Like having a very like habitual morning routine is something that I had for a while, but now I've started to switch up the times that I get up, like usually around the same time, and I'll try it for like a couple days or weeks on end to make sure it's actually something that I'm trying. But switching up different things and just taking different people's information that worked for them and then switching it up. That's part of why I interview people here on this podcast, because when it really boils down to it, because everybody comes from different backgrounds and are becoming successful in a bunch of different ways. No one's story is going to be exactly identical. So go ahead. I get to hear all this different stuff. I get to take the stuff in. I get to share it with you guys, the listeners, and share this experience with whoever my guest is at the time. Today it's you, Casey. But then hear all of this different stuff and then provide people with the different things that they can try. That's why when I'm building out after this, what I'm working on now and why I haven't put out any podcasts as of a few days, or actually a few weeks at this point, honestly, is because I'm gathering resources from books and podcasts and putting together outlines and what's eventually going to become video guides and courses for people to be able to look into ways that they can improve whatever it is that they want to and get whatever they want and become exceptional and become one of the people who I'd want to interview as an exceptional undergrad, or to do whatever you want to because it's you, it's your life. We're not all going to be the same. You have to figure out what your definition of being exceptional is and then use what we're building here, use the podcast, the information from others to try different things to then get to where you want to be that exceptional version of Casey or of whoever is listening to the podcast right now.
And that is the single best thing you can do for other undergrads out there. And it's the biggest reason why I was excited to talk to you today. We tend to fall in the trap being college students of labeling our accomplishments on what's on our LinkedIn. But everything that you're talking about right now with is building up habits. By the way, this is for people that struggle with mental health issues or don't struggle with mental health issues. Guess what? Not everybody is happy every hour of every day. So what you're doing is you are giving people tools, regardless of where they're at, to try on for size, emphasizing trying on for size as opposed to this is the way that you become happy. And these are issues that people 30, 40, 50 years older than us continue to struggle with. And it's because it was not baked into their education at any point in time. So I am grateful that there's folks like you, Jack, that understand at a very young age how important it is to start building up these practices, soft skills, whatever you want to call them, because that's what leads to the tangible accomplishments, becoming a CEO, founding a company, etc. It starts with you as a person and what you decide to do every single day.
A massive thing as well is not only this as well of all of the content and what not you're consuming, but it's also the people who you're around as well, which is why what I'm going to do when I'm also building out once some of the courses and guides are up as well is to have a community online that people can get together in, kind of like how you were mentioning your one for college to climate, where I can have people who are like-minded who are all trying to become exceptional or be exceptional already, or they're working on it because everyone's working on stuff anyways, to come together with people who are like-minded and grow together. That's the plan. I mean, I just told you that. So there you go. And I feel like it's just so fun because I'm very passionate about a lot of the stuff. I mean, you could literally hear me speaking right now. And I just want to be able to share things that I have potentially found that could be of use that maybe aren't even good for me, honestly. Maybe it's something that I tried that doesn't work out well for me, but it could help somebody else get to the exceptional version of themselves. So it's information that I should be sharing, that I should be finding for people. And I get to learn all of it and I get to have great conversations with people like you, Casey.
Well, as soon as that community opens up, you shoot me a text, okay?
Oh, I will. We'll be hearing about it for sure. All right, let's move into a little bit more here. Specifically, something that people kind of struggle with, and I've struggled with myself, is positive and negative self-talk. Were there any ways here that you have maybe switched up your self-talk to be a little more positive if it was negative, or do you have any tips for what people could do there? Because I think that is something that definitely plays a big role whenever you're struggling with mental health. I know I've had that myself.
You could not have asked a better question to a better person. It is the single biggest issue that I realized I had with my own mental health. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. Without a doubt. Sophomore year, I remember, and apologies for the graphic story, I was in the shower and it was after a math test that I don't think that I performed well on. I performed fine on it. But I remember being in the shower, and the reason I mentioned such a tiny, tiny example is I was being so mean to myself. The things that I was saying to myself, it got to a point where it felt very out of body, which is like I finally could hear the things I was saying to myself. And it was a crazy revelation because I would never say those things to anybody else but myself. That's the cliche you usually hear. We treat ourselves worse than anybody that we've ever met. And the reason I bring it up is because it was the first time that I actually heard that voice. More often than not, it is just on the entire time. It's static. But the minute that it starts elevating to a certain extent where you have this moment of like, this is not how I feel. I did a fine job. There's no connection between the things I'm saying to myself and reality. One of the books that I want to recommend is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And he talks about a similar story, which is he suffered greatly from mental health issues and depression, despite everything else being good on paper. I mean, he was relatively successful at that time. He was healthy. There was nothing to point to and say, this is the reason why I feel this way. And that disconnection grew bigger and bigger between his internal state and his external state, so much so that at some point he talks about this moment of reckoning, which is like, there is no connection between how I feel and the world around me. So clearly, it has something to do with my own mental state right now. And his whole book is about understanding that negative self talk that everybody deals with on a day to day basis, and how you can start, first of all, listening to it, acknowledging it, realizing it's not you at all. And something beautiful comes out of that because silence starts to happen. And you find yourself when you're going through times of high stress or anxiety or guilt or whatever it is, you can start to feel the voice creep up and be ready for it and accept it. And over time, you'll hear less and less of it. That is the single biggest thing that has happened for me over the past 2 years. I'll credit the Vipassana retreat. I'll credit the book that I read. I'll credit just small little daily meditation practices. But we all deal with so much inner criticism on a day to day basis, and a very few of us are aware of it. So, finding ways to acknowledge that, be comfortable with it, and then go about fixing it is so wildly important. Thank you for letting me spiel for about 5 minutes, Jack.
Of course. That's something that I noticed about myself as well. It's just the way that I talk to myself, exactly like you said, like you wouldn't talk to anybody else like that. I think it's tough because you almost have to do kind of what David Goggins was saying, or at least this is what I've noticed as well, where he said that he has multiple voices in his head, where he has basically like this negative self-talk, then he's got the other person who is like the David Goggins that we know, who like runs around and like does crazy stuff. Are you familiar with David Goggins?
Yes, a little too much.
Okay. Yeah, so he has this where like he calls it like his inner bitch or whatever, or something like that. And then it's like Goggins, and he talks about how he needs to basically just have the Goggins voice like overrule the other one. And I think maybe like not to that extent, but to in a way where you recognize that you recognize what's going on in your head in the way that you're speaking to yourself, to where you can either almost kind of like develop another voice there, or just at least recognize it, but to maybe develop another voice where you can kind of quiet the other one down, that is like that positive thing that's like pushing you to say, I could do this, I can lift this weight, or I can do all this other stuff, and be the actual positive rock that you need. I thought it was very interesting. I watched a podcast recently with David Goggins. It was the one with Andrew Huberman that came out a couple months ago, a month or two ago. It was very interesting because it went into more about David Goggins and his inner workings and stuff that he's actually had to deal with, because it was more of science based stuff, because it's Andrew Huberman. Great podcast. But it was interesting because it really hit me with the realization that we were talking about earlier, which is you have to focus on yourself and building up you. Because I would look at David Goggins sometimes, like exactly like this motivational thing of like he's running all the time, like I could run, I could do this or whatever, and very inspiring. But the way that he went through and talked about a lot of things that he had to go through in his life, and specifically one of the things was how he wakes up like every morning, like he could not even read like throughout high school, or he was struggling with stuff like that. And it hit me that he has to wake up every morning or whatnot, or he makes himself wake up in the morning and speak about or study things just so he can acknowledge what it is that he's trying to learn, so he could retain the information. And I luckily don't have that problem. I could think of things and remember them, and my memory is pretty good. And I have other things, obviously, that I do well. But it really made me realize, man, like number one, obviously the mindset of the way that I'm speaking to myself, it doesn't have to be as extreme as what he does, but also just remembering he's gone through completely other stuff. You've gone through completely other stuff than I have. And it just makes sense for me to just be me, find the stuff that I can take from him. Like I just said, like developing another inner voice to where I can help myself and become more positive. But then also recognize I don't need to do all the stuff that he has to do. I didn't struggle like he had for that thing. I've struggled in other ways, but just take what you can use and use it and experiment.
It's huge. It's so important. There's a type of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, and it deals specifically with what we're talking about right now. The idea is constantly you are saying certain things to yourself. Sometimes it's everybody's doing a better job than me. Sometimes it's why can't I just will myself to do this? And cognitive behavioral therapy challenges those thoughts and makes you actually sit down and develop what you're calling the other voice, which is go ahead and respond and quickly realize how irrational that voice is being. Everybody's doing a better job than me. Really? Everybody? And the minute you start doing that, it's almost as if that inner voice is a separate person entirely. And you're able to just, it's the easiest argument to have. Like, is that really true? And as soon as that becomes an external force, I'm sure David Goggins would say that. I'm sure this is what you would say on this journey. Has less and less weight. And by the way, for everybody listening, so I mean, just so we don't lose you in all this, like in the weeds, if any of that resonates, so just you're a college kid, you're a recent grad, and you tend to get mad at yourself for certain things. Maybe it's imposter syndrome, ever the people are doing better than me. Maybe it's you're having a hard time motivating. Spend so much time trying to listen to the things you're saying. Take out a piece of paper, take out your notes app on your phone, and just actually write it. That is the most difficult part. Because once you can start getting in the habit of hearing it, you will start to realize how irrational it is. And then cognitive behavioral therapy would say, go ahead and question it or give yourself techniques to use when you find yourself going through these situations like, oh, this is a good cue for me to go take a walk. Or maybe I'm sleepy. I yell at myself so much when I'm sleepy. I don't know if that's a you thing, Jack, or just a me thing. Um, so just getting in that habit. And like I said, this is not for folks that have a long history of depression. It's not for folks that have completely sound mental health. It's for everybody.
Exactly. I'm glad that you pointed that out because it goes even more so like outside of your head where you can notice just things that you do in general. I remember I became extremely conscious, and I think a lot of this honestly has to do going back to our earlier point with meditation of just becoming more present in the moment now because I'm releasing all the rest of the thoughts that I have and just focusing solely on what's going on now. So I'm able to see what's actually going on and the things that I'm doing and how I'm speaking to myself in my own head. But to my point of just bodily things, I'll notice even right now, I'm like moving my hands or something like this every now and then, like kind of, and I'll notice myself doing that. I'm trying to get myself to stop. But a great example of this would be whenever I was nervous, I would always start like closing my body language and like kind of stretching and stuff, kind of like this, how I'm doing it all the time, or I'd just start stretching. And I realized that so long ago of how impactful that was for me. And once I really realized that, I was able to notice what my body was about to do and how I'm able to now change that. And a lot of that for me, a cue is just say like open body language. And anytime I do that, I'm good. But it's not only the mental aspect of giving yourself these negative self-talk, negative thoughts because it just comes up naturally, but it's once you hear that, like you said, recognizing it or seeing these different things that you're going to do and then being able to begin to change it.
So if Eckhart Tolle was here, once again, he wrote The Power of Now, he would talk about the pain body and the connection between mental anguish and then the way it manifests itself in the body. I have like the worst chest tightening when I get stressed. It's crazy. I mean, it's like the fact that my body has a reaction to the fact that I am 2 minutes late to a class that I don't even need to be on time for. That's crazy. And sometimes the best cue for people is like what you said. You find yourself clenching your arms, and you're not opening. Or for me, it's realizing that I feel pain in my body. Whatever way you find it, just finding those cues, because then two things can happen. One, you can start to alleviate the mental strain that you might have just by acknowledging it and recognizing it's there. And two, and this might happen as a result or um, to trigger the mental calmness, but trying to relax the body. They're both cues for each other. It depends on which one you find first.
That's actually interesting that you might say that because I haven't really thought about it too much. But anytime I'd go and exercise and make sure that I moved my body, and that's why I think whenever I started to have better mental health, it was also whenever I've been exercising a bunch, as I've continued to do now. But as I've exercised and pushed my body and started to move that around, had always noticed that I started to alleviate some of this mental anguish that was going on. I'd still have some negative self talk, like you can't do this weight or something. But I notice now, especially, that it's always, now that I've developed it more, it's like, yeah, like you can do this, like we got this. But I've noticed a lot of that almost like mental anguish kind of be alleviated through exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's probably one part endorphins, two part just giving yourself room to move. And I think a lot of people look to exercise as a way to give their mental health a break.
You mentioned for the TED Talk coming up, you're going to start talking about either not setting goals or setting smaller goals or whatnot. What is your philosophy for goal setting right now, and how has it changed over the past few years?
So this is what I'll spend the lion's share of my time in the TED Talk talking about. It has always been set big goals and push yourself to achieve them. And what I'm going to talk about is this never be satisfied cycle that we are indoctrinated into, having lived in the US for as long as we have, where we're in this cycle of set a goal, push yourself, achieve it, but don't get satisfied. Just set another goal, push yourself, achieve it. Nowhere in this cycle is there room for satisfaction. And that's just the reality of the world that we live in. As I recognized that, this came out of having finished the Vipassana retreat. I got to the end of 10 days. I had finished what to me was the tried and true way of resolving my mental health issues. And I came out worse than I was going into it. And the big realization there was that it was the problem was that I had set a goal in the first place. The goal was to complete the Vipassana. The expectation was that there was going to be satisfaction as a result of it. And the way that I've adapted my mental health practices or just daily habits has been making them into habits as opposed to goals. So people talk about intentions over goals. People talk about micro goals. People talk about systems. The other book recommendation I'm going to throw at you is Atomic Habits, James Clear. If you haven't read it already, okay, you're nodding.
Yeah.
But for other people out there, holy cow, I cannot recommend this book enough. Maybe I'll come back to that in a second. Point being, we spend so much time fixating ourselves on the actual goals that we want to accomplish. It does not matter to us how we get there. And think about how paradoxical that is for meditation. I was sitting there in this meditation hall for hours upon hours, just thinking about day 10. How am I supposed to be present and get the intrinsic value of meditation when I'm focused on something that's going to happen 9 days from now, right? So my whole philosophy for goal setting started changing in the realm of mental health, and then it's just changed to all aspects of my life. But the reason that you ever feel dissatisfaction or failure in life is because you set a goal in the first place. What happens if you A, had something to celebrate every day, and B, did not feel like you were failing larger goals? The most successful people you see out there aren't successful just because they set these super lofty goals and at all costs just fought to achieve them. By the way, that might work for some people, but check in with them, say how they're doing, and they'll probably have a 2-hour therapy session for you. The people that are truly successful are the folks that, first of all, hit this point, which is how can I adapt myself from big, lofty goals to smaller micro goals, little habits that I can have on a daily basis, but push me in the directions that I want to go in. Every musician can tell you this. They didn't want to win a Grammy. They love making music and they played every day, and they happen to win a Grammy because of it.
I have two things to say here. The first one that I want to mention is from another podcast episode with my buddy Quentin, who was on. He recently graduated from High Point, but he had an interesting way of setting goals. He likes to think about it as setting milestones instead of goals. So basically, having almost like a bigger goal that he could look after and like kind of go after, but then to also give himself that satisfaction of like actually completing things and becoming getting closer to the goal that he has. He would set milestones in for different things along the way. So whenever he hits this, then he'd hit the milestone, be able to celebrate a little bit, and then be able to continue to move forward towards that bigger goal. So I think that adds in that sense of achievement that we lack, the satisfaction sometimes. It's something that I've started to do a little bit now. But I like your point to having almost like a goal, have the habits be goals that you kind of try and hit every single day, to where then it builds up to hit these other milestones and hit these goals that you would have that is larger, so you can get that satisfaction easier, I think, is kind of what we're going off of. And then the second thing that I also think correlates, sorry, correlates is this law, the law of detachment, which is the sixth law in the seven spiritual laws of success by Deepak Chopra. It's one of my favorite books. And what it basically states is that, I'll read you it, I have it up. It says the law of detachment says that in order to acquire anything in the physical universe, you have to relinquish your attachment to it. It says you give up your attachment to the result. You don't give up on the intention. You don't give up the desire. And I think it's it's interesting that you say this stuff, because it's almost like what you said for your mental health and like not having goals for it. It's like giving up the need to have everything be completely perfect and executed exactly the way that it needs to be done. And then that allows you to just do what you need to do to get to what you want, rather than obsessing over the fact that it needs to be a certain way and you have to have it like this. Because as long as you have it open for a period of time of, it's like, I'm just going to continue to work towards this, and you detach from when it's going to end up being done, when it's going to, like, the exact way that it's going to be achieved and whatnot, then you allow yourself to be open, be detached from things, and just almost attract what you want into your life.
The best thing I ever did for my mental health was realize that my mental health will never be perfect. The best thing I did for my depression was say that my depression will never completely go away. And it was such a ugly, seemingly paradoxical thing to have to reconcile, but it's because of everything you just talked about. The minute you detach yourself from that ultimate goal, you can actually start making progress towards it. And then on the second point of your buddy talking about milestones instead of goals, I completely agree. So I quickly teased Atomic Habits by James Clear. He essentially spends his book, first of all, detailing why it's so important to build daily habits and how it is the cornerstone to deep fulfillment and satisfaction with life. And then he talks a lot about needing to have something to celebrate every day. So if I want to get in better shape, maybe I want to run a marathon. Focus so much more on the things you do on a day-to-day basis. Make sure they're small enough for you to habituate, because it's those small changes that can compile into big changes in the long run, and celebrate them every day. What you're not doing is, oh, I didn't run a marathon today. Real bummed about it. No, you're celebrating that little run that you did. So I'm glad that your buddy's got that mindset. I think it's really important for other people to get to. But the other piece is trying to be so much more content with not running a marathon. What I stress more than anything is not to have the expectation of satisfaction once you achieve the goal.
Hmm. Tell me more about that last point.
So again, the biggest pitfall that I fell into with the Vipassana retreat is that I expected on day 10 to walk out with my depression gone, my mental health much, much better. And I didn't care what day 10, or excuse me, what day 1 or day 3 looked like. It just mattered that I walked out feeling that way. For folks that set the intention to run a marathon, I'll use a better example because I keep using the same ones. LeBron talks about this. LeBron has won so many things. On paper, he has achieved so many goals, but he has talked about the feeling of emptiness that he's felt after winning championships. And that's the reason why a lot of the best athletes that we love immediately just start working again. They spend as little time possible at the top celebrating because they love the sport. They're there to play the sport. They want to get back into it because of the intrinsic value. Someone just expect that once we become a billionaire or IPO or get into our favorite college, that there's just a deep, long-lasting satisfaction. You might feel great for the next couple days, but do not expect it to change anything in your life. That's why I say to get rid of the expectation of satisfaction after you achieve a goal.
Okay, so the expectation of the satisfaction. I think that's the part that I missed, because I have noticed that too as well, what you've said, which is it's almost like thinking about it this way, where it's the statement, when I have this, I'll be happy. And then
Boom.
you finally get that and you're not happy. And
Mm-hmm.
you're asking, when am I going to get this next thing? So then I can be happy there. And it's, I guess, exactly what you said, removing that expectation to have the satisfaction. I think I just got a little bit confused on part of that. And I'm glad that we were able to flesh it out a little bit better.
It's your job to make sure that I'm not saying random things that make absolutely no sense.
If I'm confused on it, the listener might be confused. So I think it's good for me to, clarify things every now and then,
Yeah.
or I just messed up and missed it. What was your motivation to switch up habits in your life, besides, of course, the mental health stuff as well? Were there any other goals that you had set, or micro goals or mini goals or whatever that you set that you were really trying to go after?
I think a lot of what we've talked about today can be boiled down into some core tenets. So, all this talk about inner criticism can be boiled one step down to what you hit on, which is general presence in your life. The more you're present, the more you're aware of how your body is or what's going on around you or your inner landscape, the more intentional you're living with life. And I think the idea for habits for me was trying to expand the amount of presence that I had in my life. And this is good for mental health. This is good for how I've gone about my relationships. The idea is that you're not living reactively. I'm not responding to stimuli and just immediately having a reaction. It's I'm deciding how I want to spend every day. And I think even for my workout goals, I think it all boils down to the more the more habits that I have and the more that I can make them feel like it's just something that happens naturally on a day-to-day basis, it feels like I just have a lot more intentionality over my life.
I feel like I feel like sometimes what I've noticed with myself is I still do, I have routines like morning routines and nighttime routine. I almost feel like, and this is what I've been trying to challenge myself with this a little bit lately, but I almost feel like I'm sometimes not being intentional if I have things as a habit, because it just kind of forms for me to just sort of roll into, where it's like I'm not thinking about it and it's just kind of happening. So I'm not almost intending to do it. It just happens to be getting done. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was the missing piece right there. So once again, hopefully the last time I'll mention him, James Clear, Atomic Habits. He talks about the misnomer that more often than not, people assume habits mean autopilot, which means I'm not really thinking. I'm just, you know, executing robotic functions. And what James Clear likes to talk about is it is the opposite. Having good habits gives you more room in your day to do the things that you want to do. Think about people that it takes all their willpower to get to the gym and work out. And then think about people who can go through their whole morning and come back from the gym and like they've just been on autopilot. By the way, same effect. You're still getting the benefits of working out, but one person just spent a whole lot less mental energy getting themselves through that. And more often than not, if you can't get yourself to, sorry, I want to change the tone on that. If you are not somebody who has the ability to just get to the gym every single day without thought, that might feel like it creeps more into your day because maybe you find weirder times in the day to do it. Or maybe you have irregular lengths of workouts, or maybe you just don't work out. And then all of a sudden you start beating yourself up about it. So I think it's twofold. I think it's the more habits you have, the less room you're giving yourself to yell at yourself. Ugh, why can't I be the kind of guy that brushes my teeth before I go to bed every night when I'm exhausted? You're not yelling at yourself anymore, and you're also giving yourself a lot more room in the day to actually spend times to do things intentionally.
So it allows you to be intentional in other ways.
Bingo.
That changed my perspective on that. I've looked into Atomic Habits. I haven't read the full thing yet, but I think that's a point that definitely clears up stuff for me. Which it's not like I would stop doing the habits. I'm so used to doing all of them that I just do it and it helps all the time anyways. But I like that the end point of now I can it helps me be intentional in other areas of my life.
Well, by the way, I mean, it's worth mentioning. I mean, a habit of doing meditation is not like you're just doing it on autopilot. It's so much easier for you to do it because you have set your environment up to cue yourself into doing it and doing the task as opposed to, oh my gosh, here we go. Here we go. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to meditate 5 minutes. Here we go. So, once again, not falling in the trap of thinking that the habits themselves are just mindless activities. I still find just as much value out of the meditation. It's just a whole lot easier. And then the second point, like you said, which is you open up your day so much more for intentionality and other ways that you want to spend your time.
Whenever you have times, maybe it's for school or for any work that you have to do, how are you able to get yourself to lock in and focus and be very productive? Are there any sort of habits that you do that you've implemented to make sure that you're able to become a lot more productive? Or what are your thoughts on that? What do you end up doing?
So, risking my roommate listening to this podcast and hearing me talk about all these amazing strategies that I have to maintaining productivity, let me disclaim by saying this is something I have not figured out yet. I have not figured out the secret sauce. I have many, many issues when it comes to task prioritization, productivity, call it my ADHD, call it any number of things. But I have tried to find strategies that I know work for me. So I don't know if anybody on the podcast has talked about the Pomodoro method, but there's all sorts of clocks online that you can find. The idea here is that you do 25 minutes of work and then break for 5 minutes. You do 25 minutes of work and then break for 15. And there's so many cute little widgets, apps you can buy out there that'll do that work for you. It'll just keep you on track. And the idea here is that it is, once again, getting you in the habit of taking breaks after a certain amount of time. I feel like a good amount of people would feel comfortable with the idea of being able to do 25 minutes of work. By the way, there's some folks that can just put their head down for an hour and then come back up and maybe grab a snack and then do another hour. So again, I do want to stress it's not one size fits all. I've just found that for me, having that clock just running and getting the habit of turning it on as soon as I start doing work has been super, super helpful, especially for getting me to walk around and relax and then get back to it. The only other thing I'll mention is it has made a world of difference to put my phone on Do Not Disturb when I start doing work. It's not just the fact that the notifications aren't coming in, it's also the intention that you set when you hit that button. I can almost feel it. As soon as I hit that little moon icon on my phone, it's like, oh, it's game time.
I had never heard of that method beforehand. I'm glad that you brought it up. I actually usually do different stuff. Instead of trying to give myself more breaks, I usually try and lock in for like the longest period of time that I possibly can to get as much work done as pretty much possible. And then afterwards, I might try to take a break or something like that. I've noticed that this helps me induce what's known as like a flow state, basically a period of time. don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's whenever you're basically just entrenched into whatever the task is, or if it's sports, they call it like being locked in or like in the zone. And this is when almost like you're almost like merged one with the task where you're completely fully focused. I've noticed for myself, if I put my phone on do not disturb mode or in a focus mode to where I'm not worrying about any notifications, nothing. And then I solely basically just cut out every single other distraction and solely focus on the task at hand, then I'm able to, within probably 15, 20 minutes of just sitting there working on it, if I can get myself to start, then I'm able to just compound and get into this flow state where I can finish whatever it is that I need. And then if that ends up being a 30-minute session or an hour session, 4 hours or whatever, cool. It's great. And you aren't going to stay in the flow state the entire time. I've noticed that for me, if I want to, if I have like coffee as well or get caffeine in my system, I can get locked in as well, which is nice. But usually I just try and work completely sober of any sort of stuff. Also, fasting. You mentioned fasting in the meditation retreat as well, how you were doing that. I've noticed that fasting is very good for productivity. I don't know if that had anything to do with the meditation retreat with the fasting, but that was interesting as well.
Yeah, a lot of points to chew on there. I've heard a lot of people that find the flow state is their most effective strategy, and I probably haven't given myself enough literature and ability to actually figure that out if that's a good strategy for myself. I am curious. We could talk about this off the podcast, but in terms of just getting your eyes glued off the screen, I think that is also very important for me. So I do wonder, I mean, if you are working on something on the computer, if they recommend just staring at the computer for 2 hours or however long it takes to get the task done, or if they do recommend some form of physical break, even if your mental focus is still on the task. Um, and then as for the fasting, you're going to have to ask the good folks at the Vipassana. I have experimented with intermittent fasting. This will be the biggest disclaimer of the podcast in saying, like, only do this if, first of all, only do it to experiment. Don't make it a turnkey solution to fix problems. And it does not work for a lot of people. But the times that I've done it, I definitely have seen increased amounts of focus.
Yeah, it's not something to be used all the time crazy. I wouldn't say. I've done it a good bit now where I'm pretty comfortable, and if I really need something to be really locked in and very productive, then it's like a definite doing it. Like right now, I'm fasted. I It's like 120, which is fine. I just haven't ate anything. It's not that big of a deal if you just drink water. But it's also, you have to make sure that you are careful with a lot of the stuff where you're not just, you're building up stuff. Like you aren't going to go and do like a 2 day fast or something insane just because, like, randomly. You need to have protective measures in place, like keeping snacks on you or something, just in case you're gonna like die. I mean, you aren't gonna die, but you feel crazy like you're gonna die.
Yeah, again, start super, super small. And then also make sure you're doing something for the right reasons. We're so used to having people telling us the next big thing, oh, you have to do this. So make sure that you're coming into it the mindset of, oh, I'm just experimenting. I'm just shopping around, seeing what works for me.
Exactly. And I think that goes back to the point from earlier in the podcast, which was about how you just want to shop around. You need to hear everybody else's stuff, be open to everything, attached to nothing, and then use what you need and what works for you. Try the stuff and then move forward.
Bingo.
All right, let's round it out here a bit, Casey. What advice would you give to other undergrads who are looking to excel in any area of their life, whether that be from books, habits, personal experience is that you've had? What would be some of the best pieces of advice that you would give to people?
We covered a lot in this podcast, and I'm trying to figure out if there's one single takeaway that I can have people walk out of this with. I think it would be to just start focusing on your inner critic. It is not something that is ever talked about in a classroom setting, a family setting, a social setting. It is an ugly thing that we all experience. And if what I'm saying to you right now feels like nonsense or you don't understand it, that's okay. Just do me one big favor. The next time that you are beating yourself up and seemingly disproportionate to whatever's happening, let's say you woke up past your alarm, you didn't actually miss anything, but you are so irate with yourself that that happened. When you find that misalignment between your reaction and the actual thing happening, try to just listen, like stop doing anything else, start listening to the voice, try to write down what it's saying. And a lot of people fall in the habit of actually just vocalizing it. Some people just start yelling at themselves. That's the easiest cue. Write that down. Don't let that just fall by. And then, first of all, give yourself a lot of love. Realize that this is not something that you, Jack, me, Casey, feels. And it's just the habits that we've built over the years of this negative feedback loop. And then when you go from there, you can start to respond to it. And it's that second voice that you talked about. It's just reassuring yourself and giving yourself extra love anytime that you start hurting yourself. And when you create that habit of showering yourself with love, the minute you start feeling some hate coming in, you will be shocked at the impact that it has on your entire life, not just those moments, but throughout your entire life. It is the single best way to improve your relationship to yourself and your general outlook on life. That's it. I'm done. That's my advice. Sorry it took me 5 minutes to explain it, but get out there and start listening to that inner critic.
I appreciate it. I definitely think that that's a great piece of advice there. Something I'm still working on myself and will continue to work on. But now that you said it, now it's a definite that I'm going to be looking at it even more. So, yeah, I appreciate you coming on here, Casey. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else that you would like to mention on the podcast here, these last few seconds?
I love what you're doing, Jack. This is so amazing. I had so much fun speaking with you the past hour, and I am just so stoked to see where this goes. It's bigger than a podcast.
For sure. For sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words. And yeah, I hope you enjoy another episode of Exceptional Undergrads. If you found inspiration in today's episode, head on over to our website, exceptionalundergrads.com, for show notes as well as resources from this episode and all our episodes. We're always looking for new undergrads to showcase on the podcast in the future. If you'd like to be featured, visit our Apply Here page on the website, fill out the application, we'll hit you guys back up. And as always, stay exceptional.